Hi there, I'm Paula Jameson, and I'm coming to you from Public Media Network in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We are going to be speaking with the Dean of Students of the BVI, which is an Institute of Ayurvedic Studies here in Kalamazoo. And we are talking about Ayurveda, which is an ancient tradition of healing that comes from India. Our guest today is Bill Courson, and he and I are going to, I hope, have a really wonderful conversation talking a little bit about the sort of philosophy and worldview that Ayurveda comes out of, and I believe also maybe a little bit of what the kind of science of Ayurveda as well. So Bill, welcome.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's a real delight to be here with you.
I'm so glad to see you. Could you start off by giving us just a brief thumbnail sketch of Ayurveda?
Well, Ayurveda, the word Ayurveda comes from two Sanskrit words, Ayush and Vidya, meaning the science of life. It means the same thing that the word biology means, but in context, it means the science of longevity. In other words, the science of the means for prolonging life and enhancing life's quality.
Okay.
And it's a healing tradition. It seeks it seeks for its practitioners and its adherents to maintain an optimal level of health, or where health is lacking, to achieve an optimal level of health.
And this is a very ancient tradition, am I correct?
Its origins are lost. Let me use a cliche, in the primordial mists of antiquity.
Okay.
We don't know how old Ayurveda is. Ayurveda is as old as, well, Ayurveda began when the first human being or proto-hominid picked up a plant and took it as medicine, so it's inestimably ancient.
All right, all right. Well, that's very good, I think, for us to understand that. This is a tradition that has come to the New World, has come to America, and clearly, you're clearly an American, not of Indian origin, as far as I can see.
Nope.
And I would like, maybe, if you could just give us a little bit of an idea of how you came to this.
Well, yes, I could tell you Ayurveda and the teaching of Ayurveda is for me a second career.
Okay.
For the first 26 years of my life, I followed an utterly unrelated and wholly dissimilar profession. I was a certified public accountant and a tax practitioner.
That's pretty different. Okay.
Yeah, no, there's not much. There's not much in common. Medicine and healing had been my first love.
Okay.
While I was, I like to think I was good at what I did. It certainly provided me with the economic wherewithal to retire from its practice in 1996, and I knew I wanted to find something more akin to my own, nature and inclination and interests. And it so happened at that time a couple of friends were running a yoga studio and asked me, Bill, would you like to come and administer our yoga studio? And of course I said yes, I think it would be interesting. And the yoga studio that I worked at, it was in northern New Jersey. It was called Starseed Yoga. And it was the area's oldest and largest traditional yoga studio. Whilst there, we had a yoga teacher training program, and whilst there, they offered a number of workshops for yoga teacher trainees. And one that day, they decided to offer a workshop in something called Ayurveda for aspiring yoga teachers. So I said, well, I'm going to take the day off and attend that lecture. And I did. It was an 8-hour lecture given by one of my colleagues at the BVI School of Ayurveda. Her name was Dr. Aparna Bapat. Brilliant young physician from India. So I sat in her lecture, and to make what could be a very long story very short, I knew at the end of those 8 hours that this is what I wanted to do every day for the rest of my life.
That's wonderful. Wonderful story, yes. Well, that kind of leads us into bigger questions. Ayurveda seems to me comes from a rather different worldview than our what we know of as Western medicine and the allopathic tradition. Could you just say a little bit about some of the different presuppositions?
Yes. Well, Ayurveda is a child of a scientific methodology, a scientific method of thought and means of elucidating information. Ancient India did possess a knowledge of scientific methodology based upon observation, inference, hypothesis, the reliable testimony of experts, and the drawing of conclusions based on all four of those factors. In ancient India, there were 6 contending major philosophic schools. Yoga, Vedanta, Mimamsa, Vyasa, and one in particular, Samkhya. Samkhya philosophy, the word Samkhya means counting or enumeration, provided the basis for not only Ayurveda's scientific underpinning, but for the scientific understanding, the cosmology of Vedic era India. It bears huge resemblance to the contemporary Western concept of the origin of the universe and all its contents, time, matter, space, energy, in the Big Bang, in something very analogous to the Big Bang. In the conception of Vedic cosmology, there existed 2 primordial principles, existent through all of time, without beginning, without cause. These were called Purusha and Prakriti. Those are Sanskrit names that mean nature and intelligence, or nature and energy. I like to think of them more easily for contemporary English speakers as the observer and the observed. Okay. 2 otherwise indefinable primordial existences without attributes.
And these, in this worldview, which is rather different from our own in the West, then these things have been there. There's no beginning time.
There's no beginning time insofar as the bounds of our present conversation.
Right.
But these 2 primordial principles were in balance. Something, we do not define what happened to make them go slightly out of balance, go slightly out of alignment, which gave rise to a cascade effect. That cascade effect, comprised of distinct stages, 24 stages, brought us from these primordial principles, which did not exist in time or space, down through the creation of whole categories of phenomena, ending with matter, energy, consciousness. It might seem strange to begin a talk about Ayurveda with a talk about Samkhya philosophy, sort of beginning a course on automotive mechanics with a conversation about the Big Bang Theory and the origin of the universe.
Thermodynamics.
But yes. You know, you don't need to talk about that in automotive mechanics, but if you're coming from a wholly different conceptual framework, because the information is differently categorized and because the language is so very different, it's important to know that, yes, Ayurveda does come from something which had its own structure. It obeyed the rules of scientific methodology.
And it has its own internal logic that for us as Westerners, we kind of need to be invited into it, it sounds like.
I've been told it's a tad elusive, but yes, yes, that's right.
Yes. Well, I think that's very helpful, and we'll come back to this idea about science in a few minutes. Something more perhaps about the worldview in which Ayurveda has grown up over the last hundreds of years and in more recent times.
Yes.
Perhaps a little bit about how people develop illness, how they heal from illness. What's the kind of background about that?
Let me answer your first question about Ayurveda's history and development first. Ayurveda, as I had mentioned, is inestimably old. It originated at a time before urban settlements began, before saddle agriculture began, when alphabets were newfangled things, okay? So it evolved in a way not dissimilar from Western medicine. The roots of Ayurveda are found in one of the four Vedas, the sacred books of Hinduism, the last of the four. And originally, the corpus of its work, its therapeutic work, was embodied in religio-magical remedies involving some actual medicinal remedies, but a great deal of emphasis was put on the use of amulets, of chants, of applications made to various deities for various reasons. But over time, the emphasis grew to become on actual remedies, things that could be applied to a sick person and a sick body to promote health.
So in other words, it became more specialized and directed in a way.
It became more specialized, it became more directed. It made increasing use of the resources of the material world and less use of religio-magical remedies. Ancient Ayurveda did not have the benefits of laboratory analysis or chemical analysis, so the fathers of Ayurveda, the redactors of Ayurveda, had to rely entirely on their senses. All of their information was, to use a $5 word, organoleptic, information that could be gotten by looking, smelling, tasting, listening, and touching. That source of data, combined with their amazingly acute powers of observation, promoted the increasingly scientific content of Ayurvedic therapeutics. I'm convinced the ancients were far more acute observers than contemporary humans. If you were living in ancient India 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years ago, there was a great deal in your environment that could hurt you, and a great deal that could kill you. So acute observation was a skill one wanted to cultivate if one were to survive.
In other words, you had to pay attention.
You had to pay close attention.
You couldn't be doing what we're able to get away with, which is walking around with earbuds on or looking at our cell phone or whatever.
You would not lead a long life.
Wouldn't last very long.
That's quite right. That's quite right.
Yes.
And the ancients observed their environment, and they noticed that certain plants, certain foods, certain dietary practices, certain lifestyle practices, certain physical exercises brought about certain results in the human body. The ancients were close observers of animals. When an animal fell ill, they would note what plants it would eat, what herbs it would go after. And this actually was the origin of the present day science, a subspecialty of pharmacology called zoopharmacology, the way animals relate to and select medicines from their environment.
We as humans can still learn from that and
Indeed,
take that
yes.
information and apply it to
Indeed,
our own
yes.
situations.
Indeed,
yes. And when you're talking about that close observation, that's really something that's very much a part of our Western modern scientific method as well.
Indeed it is.
Can you say a little bit about how the Ayurvedic use of science and the Western use of science, how they differ, perhaps?
The way I would say, well, of course, now though, in Western science, we have the benefit of instrumentation, of laboratory analysis, of physical investigation that the ancients did not. Okay, I would say that's the principal difference. Apart from that, you find in the Ayurvedic scientific methodology reliance on the testimony of experts. Okay, observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and the reliance on the testimony of enlightened individuals, of sages they would have been called.
And can you explain for the people that don't have a scientific background a little bit about what you mean by hypothesis?
Simply stating a premise. Simply stating a premise. I could state a premise, well, it's my hypothesis that when the light changes from green to red or red to green on the camera, some other thing is going to happen.
Okay.
That's in the most general terms.
Right, you're looking at one thing and you're generalizing from
Exactly,
it. Okay.
exactly.
And then you're trying to test that.
That's exactly right.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think that's helpful. Thanks. Yes, and so, and in the West too, I think we can say, at least in modern times, we've also developed a whole tradition in a way of how we test these ideas and how we create situations where we observe
Yes,
things.
yes.
I think of clinical trials in medicine,
yes,
for example.
and we like to think that the double-blind controlled placebo study is the gold standard
Right.
of investigation. Well, it's very useful, but there are other standards that exist. For example, Ayurveda views as a legitimate source of data that which we call traditional knowledge, or TK to abbreviate it.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. Where you have a traditional medicine being practiced and where you have a great number of individuals over a great expanse of territory, over a lengthy period of time, doing the same thing, eating the same herb to elicit a specific physical response. That is a source of traditional knowledge. Where you have a great many individuals and over a vast expanse of time, sometimes comprising mutually isolated ethnic enclaves doing the same thing. That is a source of data.
And that data is maybe communicated a little differently than we would do it in the Western mode. In other words, it hasn't been written down in the same way, but it has been observed and remarked upon.
It has been observed, it has been remarked upon. A Western scientist looking at it would call it anecdotal, but what is any research data other than a string of anecdotes?
Right, right.
Shorter or longer, but still a string of anecdotes.
And how we explain them may be a little different from how another tradition explains them.
Yes, yes.
And this is where I think the richness comes in of looking at some of these different traditions and what
Yes,
they can
indeed.
bring to all of our understanding of, in a way, how the human mind works.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
So,
indeed.
yeah, so I think that's very exciting too. Well, when you've been talking about Ayurveda, some of the things that you bring to mind to me are other ancient healing traditions that have perhaps gotten a little bit more attention in the West. And I'm thinking, for example, of traditional Chinese medicine.
Oh, yes, yes,
Which,
indeed.
of course, it's been quite a few years now, but the idea of using acupuncture and there's been some Western studies of the
Yes,
effectiveness.
yes.
Can you say anything? Is there a relationship between Ayurveda and traditional medicine?
There is a relationship. It appears that much, not all, but much of the corpus of traditional Chinese medicine comes to it from Ayurveda.
Interesting.
Okay. Now there may have been some things introduced at a much later period in time from traditional Chinese medicine into Ayurveda, but generally speaking, the weight of scholarship is that Ayurveda is much the older practice, although unlike Chinese medicine, whose written classics are older than the written classics of Ayurveda, we need to bear in mind that Ayurveda's classics were written late in its history, not early. So many Chinese practices, including pulse diagnosis, including acupuncture, including the use of certain herbs and somatic or manipulative therapies, are of Indian origin. We know that Chinese medicine has admixed into it certain local health practices that have existed in China from time immemorial, that there were certain practices introduced into Chinese medicine from another great traditional lineage which made its impact on Ayurveda, Greco-Arabic medicine, or the medicine of classical Greece as elaborated by Hippocrates and his followers on the island of Kos,
Yes.
brought through the Arab lands and through the Persians, who very much developed into northernmost India and filtered down into India.
So there has been cross-fertilization for millennia.
Indeed there has.
Yes.
Probably the best example of that is Tibetan medicine. which is in some respects a far more cosmopolitan type of Ayurveda than that of India, which is wholly Sanskritic in its origin. Tibetan medicine has great elements of Greco-Arabic medicine, of Mongol folk medicine, of Chinese medicine, of indigenous Tibetan health practices in it. It was in the first, I think in the 13th century, that the first king of Tibet, the man who unified Tibet and made of it a single political entity from a group of warring kingdoms, called what would have been the world's first global medical congress with physicians from the south, from the north, from the east, from as far away as Greece, and unified that into the corpus of Tibetan medicine, which calls itself Tibetan Ayurveda, and it is Ayurveda in its foundation, but it brought on a great deal more.
So we're talking about a lot of traditions, some of which are better known in the West
Yes.
than the kind of family, shall we say, of Ayurveda that
Yes.
you are representing and that you are teaching.
That's correct.
But that all of them have shared certain kind of, what do I want to say, philosophical underpinnings in a way.
That's correct, yes.
And that may be a little bit different from what we're taking for granted in today's Western world.
That is certainly true.
Could you say something about the areas where you feel that Ayurveda really has strengths in treating conditions?
Certainly, yes. My own feeling is that in dealing with nearly any health issue, Ayurveda should be a first resort, and that more, I don't want to go so far as to say dangerous, but more costly, more potentially perilous, more invasive procedures be used as a backup where Ayurveda is ineffective. I believe that Ayurveda could successfully address between 80 and 90%, maybe more, of the health issues encountered by a typical family practice physician in a typical practice daily.
And by those, you're not talking about the great traumatic injuries that...
No. If you've been in a God forbid, if you've been in a vehicular accident or if you've been bitten by a poisonous snake, Ayurveda has very little to offer you. But if you're dealing with any kind of chronic, indolent, life quality eroding problems such as rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, Parkinson's disease, bronchial asthma, COPD, uterine fibroidosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome. If you're dealing with anything like that, Western medicine does not have a great deal to offer that will be effective. The same would hold true with various types of mental problems such as depression, anxiety. There have been several headlines this past week in the media to the effect that antidepressants they don't do what they're claimed to do. They're short-acting after a certain amount of time. They tend to diminish in efficacy, with one prominent researcher saying that the best thing you could do if you're on antidepressants is throw them away as quickly as possible. But there are a number of reasons for preferring Ayurveda over more conventional healing modalities. Its safety, its availability, its affordability being chief among them.
And there's a gentleness you're talking about in the way it approaches these conditions.
Yes. We say, there's a proverb, I think I've mentioned it, first the word, then the herb, then the knife. Anything that you treat, you try to treat on the gentlest, least invasive, and most conservative level possible.
Well, and in a way, that is a philosophical approach, too, because it's meeting the patient and asking them to participate.
Yes, it is. It is. In Ayurveda, there are 4 pillars of successful therapy. We don't pin this all on the poor physician or practitioner. and those 4 pillars on which, so each bears about a quarter of the responsibility for effective therapy. The skill of the physician or practitioner, the quality of the patient's nourishment and medicines, the supportiveness of the patient's environment. Does the patient have a family who is participating in his or her care, and does the patient have adequate nursing support? Ayurveda places a very, very high value on nursing. And lastly, the patient himself. Is he or she compliant with orders given to him by the physician or practitioner? So it's a highly, highly interactive style of healing, quite out of character with what Westerners have come to expect. Which is, take 2 of these and call me in the morning.
Right, and that a whole other level, and of course we're hearing more about that in today's world. Well, you need to step up to the plate as be an informed patient and do your homework and take responsibility. And that's kind of a rough transition, I think, for a lot of us in our culture to make.
It is a rough transition to make, and it requires fortitude and stick-to-itiveness on the part of both the client and the practitioner. It does require a certain amount of hand-holding in some instances and some coaching, but it is absolutely critical that it be done, because preventive self-care is the best care. The body knows what it needs to do to stay well or to get well. It's the job of the Ayurvedic practitioner and the job of the patient to get impediments to that happening out of the way.
And I'm hearing a big level of trust here, in the trust in the body, in the processes of the body, and of nature in a way.
Indeed,
this world that,
Indeed,
you know, that we're...
At its best, unencumbered by accumulated toxins and the injuries they wreak, the body is itself the perfect healer. It contains within itself the answer to its problems. Sometimes, owing to a host of factors, including inappropriate lifestyles, lack of attentiveness to one's diet, it needs help, and Ayurveda supplies that help in as gentle a fashion as possible.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about environment, because you mentioned how important that is. And I want to shift it a little bit and say, okay, this is a tradition that grew up in a very different environment than modern Western North America. And different soil, different plants, different climates, things like that. And are there changes in the kinds of medicines and approaches that are being used by Ayurveda as it moves out of its native India?
To a limited degree, but I will give you an example of one important one. By and large, Ayurveda and its practitioners have not eschewed but tended to not assign a great value to the use of nutritional supplements or nutraceuticals, vitamins, enzymes, amino acids, and minerals, and so on. And the reason for that is ancient Ayurveda did not know that vitamins, minerals, enzymes, and amino acids existed. This is not part of Ayurveda's physiological worldview.
Right.
Okay. They didn't know the chemistry of these things. What they knew of foods were: are they sweet, salty, sour, pungent, bitter, or astringent? Are they heating or cooling in energy? And use those foods and medicines having those properties to evoke certain changes. The use of nutraceuticals was never a part traditionally of Ayurveda, but when Ayurveda was being elaborated, consumers never had to deal with things like the very serious problem of the demineralization of soils, the very serious problem, and it is a problem, of the genetic manipulation of food plants, the use in terms of flesh foods, of meats, of growth hormones, of antibiotics, the issue of feed animals being fed themselves on animal-containing feed products, which is what gave rise to mad cow disease and its dreadful human counterpart, Jacobs-Creutzfeldt syndrome, the prion diseases that are absolutely devastating.
And so our food supply has shifted enormously over the...
This isn't even addressing the issue of environmental contamination.
Right, right. But just how we raise and produce food in the modern world, and again, to say nothing of processed foods even if you're eating a kind of a whole diet.
You know, I like to say, if it comes wrapped in foil, paper, or plastic, don't eat it. It's not food. So, in my own practice, yes, I do use nutritional supplement therapy where I think it's appropriate. That is one way in which Ayurveda has evolved, or is evolving. There certainly are others, but that's an important one.
Well, that's helpful to know. Thinking about our larger environment here too. Yes, so very good. Yes, I was also wondering. One of the things I'd read was there's been a lot of talk and using the term elements when you talk about principles of Ayurveda. Can you say something about elements?
Surely I can, yes. The use of the word element in Ayurveda it's not synchronous with the use of the word element. If you think back to high school or to college, you remember the periodic table of the elements specifying. I think at the time it was 116, but undoubtedly they've added many more. The elements that Ayurveda refers to are not elements in the sense of a particular number of protons, a particular number of neutrons, and shielded with a particular number of electrons, and that is what the distinctiveness of the numbers and arrangement of those is what gives a specific element. It's what makes oxygen, oxygen, and silver, silver, lead, lead, and neon, neon.
Well, and the physics and chemistry of it, the things that you can't see with the senses.
Yes, exactly right. Ayurveda's use of the word element is from the Sanskrit bhuta, okay? Which doesn't mean element in our understanding so much as state of matter. Now, in Ayurveda's view, there are 5 elements. Those elements are space, vacuum, an empty field, air, fire, water, and earth. And if we look around us, we see that everything in our environment partakes of one or more of the qualities of those elements. Okay? These, notwithstanding the fact that they do not coincide with the elements of the periodic table or of high school or college chemistry, they nonetheless are useful terms in describing the world around us and in describing substances, events, processes in a useful way,
And it's a little different from if you go back to ancient Greece and talking about the elements where fire and water and earth and air, I think were the others. And there were 4 in my recollection. So it's a little bit of a different conception, but...
Yes, clearly related.
But clearly related.
In China you have wood, metal, fire, air, and earth. So the actual nomenclature is different, but the underlying concepts are quite similar.
And how does this help the practitioner understand what's going on?
Each of the elements has properties, okay? Each of the elements has qualities. It might be said to be dense or fine, static or flowing, light or heavy, hot or cold. We can describe the elements fire, space, water, earth, and air as having a specific set of properties. By the way, these properties are ordinarily described in the form of 10 pairs of opposites, hot, cold, light, heavy, and so on. And again, in Sanskrit, we call them gunas.
Oh, okay.
We call them gunas. But the knowledge of the bhutas, the elements, and their properties is useful because if you could place in a single sentence the essence of Ayurvedic therapeutic philosophy, why do we treat diseases the way that we treat them? If we could turn that into a single English sentence, this would be that sentence. A phenomena placed in the presence of another phenomena with like properties increases in quantity and intensifies in quality. Conversely, a phenomena placed in the presence of another phenomena of unlike properties decreases in quality and intensity. So, let's take it a step further. How does Ayurveda treat disease? If something is moving too quickly, it slows it. If something is moving too slowly, it hastens it.
In other
if
words,
something is too hot, it cools it. If it's too cool, it warms it.
in other
That's
words,
the essence.
if something needs to be countered, there's a way of thinking about how to slow it down,
That's
cool it down, et
exactly-
cetera.
that's
But if it
exactly
needs
right.
encouraging in a way,
Yes.
there's a thought of how you evaluate what's going to do that.
That's exactly the case.
Yes, okay.
That's exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And
yeah.
it does. It's absolutely elegant in its logic, you know. But that is the reason for the usefulness of a knowledge of the bhutas, the elements, and their attributes.
Yes, very interesting. Well, and you've talked about gunas too in this, which was one of the terms that had always sort of mystified me. So this helps bring it a little bit more to life for me as well. I'm wondering too, in the way just overall health is viewed. If you are a ordinary person coming out of that tradition and you haven't felt the need to seek help, would you understand these things kind of intuitively, probably? Or is that something that...
Intuitively, perhaps not intuitively, but I would certainly have been exposed to them in my upbringing, you know.
So your grandmother or your mother might have said, if you're feeling this way, you need to eat this kind of food because it's going to bring you into balance?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, I think that most individuals with at least some level of cultural awareness in India would understand the idea of the gunas.
Now, you mentioned a little bit about like body manipulation. Is there a tradition of massage?
Oh,
traditions
yes,
of
indeed
massage?
there is.
Can you say
Yes,
something
there
about
is.
those?
Certainly, Ayurveda possesses several different types of bodywork therapy. I can recount two for you. One is the oiled body massage, known in Sanskrit as Abhyanga. Abhyanga is the Ayurvedic Sanskrit term for an overall body massage, ordinarily accompanied by a copious oiling of the body with medicated oils. You know, Ayurveda never evolved the concept of the hypodermic administration of medicines. It never developed the hypodermic syringe.
Never wanted to go through the skin.
Yes,
that
so
way.
the use of copiously medicated oils on the surface of the skin, oils whose medicinal properties would be absorbed transdermally through the skin. That's the point of Ayurvedic massage as much as the manipulation of specified muscles and tissues. In Ayurveda, you know, we say you should never put anything on you that you wouldn't put in you, because sooner or later what you put on you will find its way in. So that's the point of Ayurvedic massage. Yes, the manipulation of musculoskeletal and neuromuscular structures, but also the application of medicinal oils. Another form of Ayurvedic massage, although it probably isn't quite correct to call it massage, is a therapy known as marma therapy. Marma therapy bears enormous resemblance to acupuncture. Indeed, the theory is that marma therapy provided the basis of acupuncture to its later Chinese and Japanese practitioners. Marma therapy comes from a South Indian martial art called Kalaripayat. It's a kind of sword fighting. And practitioners of that martial art held that there were on the surface of the body, or just inside the bodily orifices, a number of spots, points, vulnerable points, which, if stimulated, could subdue an enemy by rendering that enemy unconscious, paralyzed, or dead. Well, the redactors of Ayurveda reasoned that if these 108 points, there were 108, 107 actually, 108 was a theoretical point. If these points can be stimulated with the intention of injuring an opponent in battle, is it not possible that they could also be treated in such a fashion as to promote a healing response to injury or ill? And that is the basis upon which Marma therapy was founded. Here in this country and in Europe, Marma therapy is ordinarily practiced with finger pressure. But in India, there is a very traditional form of Marma therapy called marma puncture, in which the skin is punctured with a small.
They actually use the little needles.
Yes, yes, such as is the case in acupuncture.
That's a little bit akin, but I think much more sophisticated than what we've discovered in the West about acupressure and some of these trigger points that we are becoming more and more familiar with, I think.
It may be a bit more elaborated, but it's had many thousands of years to become more elaborated.
Yes, yes, that's really very fascinating. I also wanted to ask you too about some of the, again, big picture things. There has been some talk about people having like 4 goals in life, or that there are 4 goals. Could you say something about that?
Well, this is not a view that is necessarily only Ayurvedic. It is a Vedic view. It is the view of Hinduism. That there are four objectives, four goals in living one's life. Very much associated with certain stages of life, and those are dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Sorry for the Sanskrit, I'll explain each. As one is born and goes through life, one is encountered with differing sets of social relationships and social expectations. In Hinduism's view, the human being goes through 4 stages. Firstly, that of the student and young person, whose chiefest obligation and the social expectation of that person is adherence to dharma, the ability to look around them, to learn from what they see. That's the essence of the word, of what the word dharma means, observation. It means the ability to absorb the result of teaching.
Learning.
To guide one's conduct on the basis of what one has learned, but also to be a good learner, to be observant, to be a good student, to be a good son or daughter. So that is very much the stage of life associated with the first principle, dharma. The second is artha. Artha is the ability to make one's way in the world, the ability to earn one's keep, as it were, to provide for one's basic necessities, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, recreation, the basic things of life. It's probably not a terribly healthy adult who looks outside of him or herself for sustenance, for the provision of basic necessities. In other words, the ability to get out and get a job, to put it in so many words.
Be a grown-up on some level.
Yes, yes, yes. The next standard is kama, or karma, which means action, but in this case it is taken to mean relationship. The ability to form relationships with others that are mutually satisfactory. Relationship with one's spouse or intimate partner, relationship with one's friends, relationship with one's employer and employees. So it's that aspect of ourselves that manages relationships in a satisfactory fashion. The last of the four is, and again, a Hindu word, a Sanskrit word, moksha. Moksha is, the word means liberation, but what it means is liberation from the chains of illusion and enslavement to materiality, enslavement to the things that hold us down. It's the ability to grow socially, but more especially spiritually.
And what I'm hearing too is wisdom.
Wisdom.
You reach a certain point in life, and hopefully some of this has started to come together in what we call wisdom.
Hopefully all of the elements of knowledge will have come together and synthesized the basis of what we're calling wisdom, yes.
And this view of life, which is really a view of human development in a way, to use the term, does seem to play very much into how one would approach well-being and illness, and this whole idea of the relationships that one has to one stage in life, as well as to the people and obligations that one has at each time of life. So what I'm hearing from this is that one might have a very different set of expectations when you're working with someone who's a young adult than someone who's even 10 years older, because they might be at a very different point in life, not just physically, but in all other ways
Most definitely. Look at the difference between a 17-year-old and a 24-year-old. Two completely dissimilar experiences. Then look again at the difference between a 24-year-old and a 30-year-old. Utterly dissimilar. So that certainly is true.
And that would be very much part of that holistic view that we haven't talked about so explicitly right now, but this idea of looking at not just the physical body and not just what we in the West call the psychology, but this whole higher spiritual side of things as well. Yes.
That's quite right.
Yes. Well, could you walk us through maybe some of the scientific discoveries of Ayurveda? Have there been contributions that Ayurveda has made to the West?
Indeed, there have been. There's a huge amount of research that is being undertaken now at Indian universities and at a good many Western universities as well, North American and European, relating to the efficacy of Ayurvedic therapies. There has been very little research done in this part of the world on basic Ayurvedic theory, but a great deal of research done on the efficacy of specific therapies. I'll give you an example. Most of the research that is being done, about 90% of it, is being done in the area of Ayurvedic herbal medicine, the usefulness of long-utilized Ayurvedic herbs to bring about certain physiological results. Many of these confirm the efficacy of Ayurvedic remedies. Let us take the case of the common spice or herb, turmeric. In Ayurveda, turmeric, one of the most beloved items in the Ayurvedic pharmacopoeia, is widely used in a great many health situations.
Well, and that's what gives curry powder that beautiful golden color too, isn't it?
One of the constituents of curry powder is ordinarily turmeric, and yes, it is that. It does have a very beautiful golden color. Turmeric is possessed of so many beneficial therapeutic properties that it would be hard to list them on a single space type sheet of paper. But among the more recent research conducted here in this country, there are indications that turmeric may possess anti-Alzheimer's properties when taken as a prophylactic measure at the onset of Alzheimer's disease symptoms. Another indicates that it may have anti-cancer properties. Another indicates that it may have the ability to forestall the formation of gallstones. Other research indicates that it may have anti-cancer properties. And as I say, these are purposes to which turmeric has been put for not hundreds, but thousands of years. There are many other herbs that are presently being studied by both Western and Indian universities for their efficacy. Regrettably, almost all the research that is being undertaken now is being undertaken in that one aspect of Ayurveda, Ayurvedic herbal medicine. I mean, it's welcome that the research is taking place, but there are other fields of Ayurveda, such as basic theory, the tridosha, that are being somewhat neglected.
Is that, well, why is that?
It is because, to a large degree, it does not fit, neatly or otherwise, into the compartmentalized Western system of medicine. Now, Western medicine has come, to my mind, Western medicine has come quite close indeed to validating the tridoshic theory. In the 1940s and 1950s, at the University of Texas at Austin, there lived a nutritional physiologist by the name of Roger Williams. And Roger Williams did something that was very unusual for a physiologist to do, but would have been the daily stock in trade of an anatomist, and that is he went to a great many autopsies, thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And on the basis of what he observed at those autopsies, he wrote that there were certain somatotypes or bodily types that fell into three categories. Dr. Williams did not know of the existence of the word Ayurveda, nor did he know of the existence of the word dosha, but I'm quite certain he came very, very close to describing the physical dimensions of the three doshas.
Okay.
He didn't call them what we call them in Ayurveda. He called them the pituitary type, the thyroid type, and the adrenal type. And these three doshas, or these three categories, were based upon the size and weight of three sets of glands in the human body, which could vary markedly in a healthy, normal population. In a healthy, normal population, you could have pituitary glands, thyroid glands, or adrenal glands that vary in size and weight to a magnitude of tenfold.
Well,
That's a healthy, normal population.
And these are healthy people.
Yeah, if you include the non-healthy, that it's much higher.
Could you give us just a quick explanation of how the word doshas are understood, because we're going to have to wrap up soon.
Surely. The word dosha comes from the Sanskrit radical dush, meaning stain or something that has been broken or polluted in some way. The notion is that it's something that can fall out of good working order. Now, we use it in our conversation to convey the same meaning as the word category.
Oh, okay.
There are three doshas, or psychobiological forces operating in the human body. These have names.
Okay, and we'll talk about that maybe next time.
We will.
Does any one person have just one of these?
By no means, by no means. Every one of the doshas is present in every cell of every tissue of every part of the body in every person. All of us have all three of the doshas operating all the time. It's their unique proportionality that makes us different people with very divergent health needs and very divergent vulnerabilities. But no, we all have all three of the doshas. Some of us have one that's very predominant, some have two, some have all three. Each requires a differing standard and type of care.
And that would be the task of the practitioner to assess this in some way.
That's correct, yes. That's right.
And then out of that, sort of solutions or approaches to care or treatment.
Precisely. This theory of the doshas forms the bedrock of Ayurvedic practice.
And that is a perfect place, I think, for us to wrap up today.
Excellent.
It's wonderful to hear from you. I want to thank Bill very much, Bill Courson.
Well, thank you ever so much.
And I'm Paula Jameson. I'm coming to you from Public Media Network in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We are thrilled that you stayed with us, and we hope to see you again. Thank you very much for joining us. So it's been a wonderful